We're taught that central banks exist to protect the economy, to ensure stability, to prevent crises, to keep inflation low and growth steady. But here's the uncomfortable question no one asks. What if financial crises aren't policy failures at all? What if, over time, central banks quietly learn that crises were actually useful? Because when you look closely at history, something strange appears. Every major economic collapse leads to more power, more control, and more influence for central banks, not less. So, how did institutions designed to prevent disasters end up growing stronger every time disaster strikes? To answer that, we have to go back to the beginning. Set the stage, the promise of stability before central banks. Economies were chaotic. Currencies collapsed. Banks failed frequently. Panic spread fast. So in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, nations created central banks with a clear mission: stability. Institutions like the Federal Reserve, the Bank of England, and later the European Central Bank were given extraordinary powers: control over interest rates, money supply, and liquidity. The promise was simple. Experts would manage the system better than markets could, and at first, it seemed to work. But then the incentives began to shift. The story: origins, rise, breaking point, fallout. Failed fixes won. Origin stability was the goal. In their early years, central banks acted cautiously. Gold-backed currencies limited how much money could be created. Interest rates moved slowly. Crises were painful but relatively contained. Money had friction. Limits existed, and those limits kept power in check. But limits are inconvenient, especially for governments. 2. Rise. The discovery of crisis management. Everything changed in the 20th century. World wars required massive borrowing. The Great Depression demanded emergency action. And governments learned something critical. In a crisis, rules can be suspended. Gold standards were loosened. Emergency lending became normal. Central banks gained new tools and new authority. By mid-century, central banks were no longer just stabilizers. They were crisis managers. And crisis management came with benefits: political influence, expanded mandates, and the power to reshape markets overnight. 3. Breaking point. When stability became optional, the real turning point came when money lost its anchor. Once currencies were no longer backed by physical limits, central banks gained unprecedented freedom. Interest rates could be pushed near zero. Money could be created digitally. Markets could be rescued instantly. And here's where the incentives flipped. During stability, central banks are invisible. Power is limited. Growth is slow. During crisis, central banks become indispensable. Power expands. Balance sheets explode. Every crisis justified larger interventions, broader authority, and permanent emergency tools. Stability shrank influence. Crisis multiplied it. 4. Fallout. Crisis as a feature, not a bug. Look at what happens after every major collapse. After market crashes, central banks buy assets. After recessions, rates are slashed. After banking failures, liquidity floods the system. These actions stabilize markets, but they also inflate asset prices, reward risk-taking, punish savers, and increase inequality. Over time. Markets adapt. Investors learn to expect rescue. Risk grows larger because losses feel temporary. This creates a cycle. Cheap money gives asset bubbles, gives crash, gives rescue, gives bigger bubbles. Each cycle leaves central banks larger, more powerful, and more deeply embedded in the economy. 5. Failed fixes. Why the same tools keep being used? Every crisis brings the same response. Lower rates, print money, inject liquidity, promise stability. And each time the solution works, briefly, but it also sets the stage for the next crisis by increasing debt, distorting prices, and delaying real reform. The system becomes dependent on intervention. Markets stop functioning without support. And the cost of doing nothing becomes politically impossible. Modern parallels. The pattern is clear today. Central bank balance sheets are larger than ever. Interest rates spent years near zero. Asset prices disconnected from real productivity. And global debt reached historic levels. Every warning sign that once signaled danger is now treated as normal. Because the system isn't designed to avoid crises anymore. It's designed to manage them. And management, unlike prevention, never ends. 1. Central banks didn't plan crises, but they adapted to them. Over time, crisis response became the source of power. 2. Stability limits authority. Emergencies expand it. 3. Repeated rescues change behavior. When losses are softened, risks grow larger. Because eventually, the tools stop working or the public stops trusting them. Like, comment and subscribe for more deep historical breakdowns exposing the systems behind global finance.